Dublin, Ireland. A city of winding cobblestone streets, ancient pubs, and a deep history that whispers through the rain-soaked air. It was supposed to be a fresh start for Ciara Donnelly. A new home, a new job, a clean slate. But 7 days after she arrived, her past found her. And when it did, it didn't just knock. It tore through her world like a storm, leaving nothing but fear, blood, and unanswered questions in its wake. The morning she was last seen alive, Ciara followed her usual routine. She left her small apartment on the north side of the city just after 7, her brown leather bag slung over her shoulder. The weather was cold, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones, but she didn't seem to notice. She grabbed a coffee from the cafe on O'Connell Street, nodding politely at the barista who had started remembering her order. A flat white, no sugar. If you had seen her that morning, you wouldn't have thought anything was wrong. But that's the thing about people running from something. They get good at pretending everything is fine. Ciara had only been in Dublin for a week, but she moved with purpose. Like she belonged there, like she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She worked at a small marketing firm, nothing fancy, but stable. The kind of job that didn't attract attention. And that was exactly what she wanted. Because if no one noticed her, then maybe he wouldn't find her. But he did. At 7:42 a.m., as she walked toward the Lewis tram station, a CCTV camera caught a man following her. He wasn't right behind her, he was careful, keeping his distance. But his eyes never left her. He wore a black jacket, a hood pulled up against the drizzle, and he moved like a shadow, blending into the crowd. It was subtle, easy to miss. And maybe that's why she didn't notice. Or maybe she had spent so long running that she stopped seeing the warning signs. The last confirmed sighting of Ciara was at 8:03 a.m. A woman in a gray coat, rushing to work, told police she saw Ciara standing on the platform, her phone in her hand, staring down at the screen. She looked nervous, the woman later recalled, like she was waiting for someone, or hoping they wouldn't show up. The tram arrived, people boarded, but Ciara never did. And after that, she was gone. Her coworkers thought she had called in sick. Her landlord assumed she was out for the day. No one noticed she was missing until she didn't show up the next morning. When the police finally searched her apartment, they found her things untouched. No sign of struggle, no forced entry. It was as if she had walked out the door and simply disappeared. But someone knew what happened to her. Because 3 days later, a fisherman in Howth Harbor pulled something from the water. Purse. Brown leather, damp but still intact. Inside, they found a wallet, some loose coins, and a single folded note. It was smeared from the seawater, the ink bleeding, but the words were still clear enough to read. "I told you I'd find you." Ciara Donnelly was 29 years old. A woman with a quiet confidence, sharp wit, and an undeniable warmth that drew people in. She had auburn hair that always seemed slightly windswept, no matter how often she tucked it behind her ears, and deep green eyes that held secrets she never spoke about. People who met her said she was easy to talk to but hard to truly know. Friendly but not one for oversharing. She grew up in Cork, the youngest of 3 sisters, raised in a modest but loving home. Her mother, Deirdre, was a retired schoolteacher, and her father, Liam, worked as an electrician until his health forced him to slow down. Ciara had always been the ambitious one, the one who wanted more. She went to university in Galway, studied marketing, and built a promising career in digital advertising. But then, 6 months ago, she vanished from her old life. No explanation, no goodbyes. One day, she simply packed up and left. Her friends noticed the change before she disappeared. In the months leading up to her move, she had stopped posting on Instagram, where she once shared snapshots of weekend hikes and late-night drinks with her coworkers. She changed her number. She even deactivated her LinkedIn profile, as if erasing every trace of herself from the world. And then there was the breakup. She had been dating Ronan Kearney for nearly 2 years. To everyone who knew them, they seemed solid. One of those couples who didn't need to try too hard. He was a charismatic, well-dressed man in his early 30s, working in real estate, always the center of attention in a room. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Their relationship had been passionate, intense, sometimes too intense. Friends later recalled moments when Ronan's temper flared in ways that didn't seem right. A slammed door, a sharp remark that left Ciara quiet for the rest of the night. And then there were the disappearances. Times when she would go silent for days, only to resurface with a forced smile and a vague excuse. She never wanted to talk about it, her friend Niev admitted later. I think she was embarrassed. Or scared. One night, Ciara confided in her sister over the phone. She didn't go into detail, but she said one thing that haunted her family long after she was gone. He doesn't like losing. And then, without warning, she was gone. A friend stopped by her apartment one afternoon, only to find the place empty. The lease was up, her things packed away. No note, no forwarding address. And now, 6 months later, she had resurfaced in Dublin. She had hoped a new city, a new job, and a quiet life would keep her safe. That whatever or whoever she was running from wouldn't follow. But monsters don't just disappear. They wait, they watch, and sometimes they come back. The last days of Ciara Donnelly's life played out like a slow-burning nightmare. One that no one noticed until it was too late. On the surface, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She went to work, kept to herself, and followed the same routine. But the small things, the kind people only piece together in hindsight, told a different story. A week before she disappeared, Ciara had started glancing over her shoulder more often. A coworker, Daniel, later told police that she seemed distracted, her mind somewhere else. She was always on her phone, he recalled, checking messages, deleting them. I joked that she had a secret admirer, but she didn't laugh. She just said, something like that. 2 days before she vanished, she had drinks with a colleague, Fiona, at a quiet pub in Temple Bar. It was supposed to be a casual night out, but somewhere between the first and second round, Ciara's hands started trembling. He's here, she whispered, barely moving her lips. Fiona turned, scanning the room. Who? Ciara forced a smile, too wide to be real. Never mind. Thought I saw someone I used to know. But Fiona noticed how Ciara didn't touch her drink after that. How she kept glancing toward the door. And how, when she finally left, she asked the bartender if there was a back exit. Then there was the phone call. On the night before she disappeared, Ciara's upstairs neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret, was watching the late-night news when she heard muffled shouting through the thin walls. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, urgent. She sounded scared, Margaret later told detectives. Not angry, not annoyed, just scared. The argument lasted less than a minute. Then silence. A door closing. Footsteps fading down the hall. The next morning, she was gone. CCTV footage and the man in the hood. The footage from that morning was grainy, but the figure following Ciara was unmistakable. He never got too close, never made a move, but he was there, watching, waiting. Detectives enhanced the images, sharpening the details. His face was still obscured by the hood, but the way he walked, the way he carried himself, it was familiar. When investigators questioned Ciara's former friends and family, one name kept coming up, Ronan Kearney. They tracked him down in Galway, where he still lived in the same sleek apartment overlooking the river. On paper, he seemed cooperative. He answered every question, even offered his alibi before they asked for it. I was in Galway all week, he told them. Ask anyone. He even leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a confident smirk playing on his lips. Look, I haven't spoken to Ciara in months. She wanted space, so I gave it to her. She's a big girl. If she ran into trouble, it had nothing to do with me. But there were cracks in his story. Police retrieved cell tower data. His phone had pinged in Dublin the night before she disappeared. Even more chilling, Ciara had called emergency services that night. The call lasted only 6 seconds before it disconnected. 6 seconds. Not enough to explain, but just enough to be a silent scream. A secret she never told. As investigators dug deeper into Ciara's past, another piece of the puzzle emerged. One she had kept hidden from even her closest friends. A few months before she left Galway, she had reported a break-in at her apartment. Nothing was stolen. No sign of forced entry. Just small, unsettling changes. A window left open that she swore she had locked. Picture frame knocked over. The subtle scent of cologne in the air. She had gone to the police, but with no proof, there wasn't much they could do. The officer who took her statement remembered her clearly. She asked me one thing, he later recalled. She asked, if someone wanted to make me disappear, how long would it take before people noticed? That night, Ciara had packed a bag. The next morning, she was gone. Now she was gone again. But this time, she wouldn't be coming back. The morning air in Dublin was heavy with mist, clinging to the quiet streets like a lingering ghost. At exactly 8:03 a.m., Ciara Donnelly was seen standing on the Lewis platform, her phone in her hand, her eyes scanning the crowd. It was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Her tram arrived. Doors slid open. Passengers shuffled inside. But Ciara never moved. Instead, she turned, walked away, and vanished. At 8:17 a.m., a woman walking her dog down a side street near Smithfield Market heard a sharp cry. Just a single, choked-out sound, quick, cut off. She paused, listening. The early morning hush swallowed everything. Her dog, a golden retriever, pulled toward an alley, sniffing the air. She hesitated, then gave the leash a tug. "Come on," she murmured. "Leave it." She would later tell police that something felt off. The air was still, but there was a presence. Something lingering just beyond her understanding. A shadow waiting. She walked away. Minutes later, in the narrow, garbage-strewn alley behind a row of old brick buildings, Ciara Donnelly was dying. She never saw him coming. 1 second, she was walking fast, phone clutched tight in her hand, breath quick and shallow. The next, a hand was on her wrist, yanking her back. Hard. She gasped, twisting, but the grip tightened. "Where do you think you're going?" The voice was low, familiar. Ronan. She had been careful. She had moved cities, changed her number, erased herself from everything. But he had found her anyway. "Let go of me," she snapped, trying to shake him off. He didn't. Instead, he pulled her deeper into the alley, away from the street, from the people who might see. "I gave you time," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I gave you space." His grip tightened. "And this is how you repay me?" She struggled, but he was stronger. He always had been. "Ronan, please." The first hit came fast. A closed fist to the side of her head. The world spun, stars bursting behind her eyes as she stumbled back. Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the damp pavement. She reached for it. He kicked it away. Ciara's survival instincts kicked in. She lunged for the street, for anywhere but here, but he caught her by the arm, yanking her back so hard she hit the wall with a dull thud. "You think you can just leave?" His breath was hot against her ear. "You think I wouldn't come for you?" She struggled, nails clawing at his wrist, at his face. She fought. She fought with everything she had. But then the knife. She barely registered the glint of metal before she felt it. A sharp, sickening pressure just below her ribs. A burning, twisting pain. Her body went rigid, a strangled gasp slipping from her lips. He held her there for a moment, watching, his chest rising and falling, the realization of what he had just done sinking in. Ciara's legs gave out, knees hitting the cold ground. A weak, trembling hand pressed against her stomach, warm and wet. Blood. She tried to speak, to say something, anything, but nothing came out. She was already fading. Ronan crouched beside her, tilting his head as he watched the light leave her eyes. "I told you," he murmured. "I told you I'd find you." Then he was gone. At 9:02 a.m., a street cleaner noticed something unusual. A phone lying near the entrance of the alley. The screen was cracked, smeared with something dark. Curious, he stepped forward. And then he saw it. A woman, slumped against the brick wall, motionless. Her skin pale, her eyes open, staring blankly at the overcast sky. The smell of blood was thick in the air. His breath hitched. He fumbled for his radio, voice shaking as he called it in. "This is Jesus, this is bad," he stammered. I think there's been a murder." Within minutes, sirens sliced through the morning quiet. Dublin had woken up to just another ordinary day. But for Ciara Donnelly, the nightmare had finally ended. Detective Fiona O'Malley stepped out of her car, the morning fog still thick in the air. The scene at Smithfield was grim, but not unfamiliar. She had seen it all before: bodies, blood, the look of someone's last moments etched into the pavement. But something about this case felt different. Maybe it was the way the victim's body was positioned, or the desperate struggle that seemed to hang in the air. O'Malley had been with Dublin's homicide division for 15 years. She was sharp, methodical, and she had a gut feeling about people, the kind that made her good at seeing through lies. She squatted beside Ciara Donnelly's lifeless body, her eyes scanning the alleyway with practiced precision. She didn't need to be told what had happened here. The evidence was already speaking to her, in the form of blood splatters, broken skin, and a phone discarded in a hurry. "Find anything?" O'Malley asked as a young forensic analyst, Connor, approached her. He had been inspecting the area, his gloves stained with dark red as he carefully bagged evidence. "Blood trail leads back down the alley," Connor reported. "Looks like she was dragged. And there's a set of footprints, his." He paused, holding up a small piece of fabric. "We found this near her hand. Doesn't match her clothes." "Ronan Kearney," O'Malley muttered to herself, her suspicion growing. The forensic team worked quickly to gather everything from the crime scene. Within hours, they had Ciara's body transported to the morgue for an autopsy. Preliminary results revealed a deep stab wound just below her ribs, likely the cause of death. But there was something else, something that didn't fit. The victim had defensive wounds on her arms and hands, indicating she fought hard to survive. But there were also scratches, small and jagged, like someone had grabbed her skin roughly. They weren't from nails. They were consistent with a fabric or rough surface, something abrasive. As the autopsy report continued to roll in, the DNA evidence was analyzed. Traces of Ronan Kearney's saliva were found near Ciara's torn clothing, a clear sign that he had been physically close to her at some point during the struggle. But it was the phone records that raised O'Malley's suspicion even more. Ciara's phone showed no incoming calls or texts from Ronan in the days leading up to her death. In fact, she had barely been in contact with him since she left Galway. The last time she had attempted to reach him was just before she left for Dublin. But Ronan's phone records, however, told a different story. His phone had pinged off a tower just outside of Dublin the night before her death, confirming that he was in the city at the time. He was lying. A breakthrough came when investigators examined the CCTV footage from the Lewis station. The man seen following Ciara on the morning of her disappearance was not just any stranger. With the help of facial recognition software, detectives discovered that the man was not Ronan, but a different figure entirely. His name was Owen Murphy, a security guard who had worked at a nightclub in Dublin. Murphy had been involved in a series of suspicious incidents at work, which included harassment complaints from female employees. He was known to have a volatile temper, and his behavior in the footage suggested he had been following Ciara for several days before her death. Detective O'Malley's instincts told her to dig deeper. She couldn't ignore the fact that Murphy's presence at the scene raised more questions. His connection to Ciara wasn't clear, but there was something about the way he'd watched her in the footage, too deliberate, too intentional. They brought him in for questioning. At first, Murphy denied any involvement. He claimed he was only following her because he thought she was a former colleague, someone he'd seen briefly in passing at a work event. But when police presented him with his phone records, things began to unravel. Murphy's phone had pinged at the same tower as Ronan's. Both men had been in the same area of Dublin on the night of Ciara's death, but they were nowhere near each other, and that was enough to cast suspicion on both of them. The real breakthrough came with a tiny piece of fabric found near Ciara's body. It didn't match the clothing she had been wearing, but it was an exact match to a jacket that had been reported as missing from Ronan Kearney's apartment weeks earlier. The jacket had been described by his ex-roommate, who had gone to visit him shortly after Ciara's disappearance. It was a subtle detail, but it was enough to tie Ronan to the crime scene. Police immediately secured an arrest warrant for him. When Ronan was brought in for questioning, his facade of cooperation began to crack. He was still calm, still evasive. But when Detective O'Malley pressed him about the jacket, he hesitated. His expression shifted. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ronan replied, his voice shaky. "I don't wear that thing anymore. I've been through enough. I didn't do anything." But O'Malley was no longer listening to his words. She was watching his hands, the way they trembled as they gripped the armrest of the chair, the way his knuckles were white, his sweat beading on his forehead. Then came the revelation that shattered everything. A former colleague of Ronan's at a real estate firm came forward. She recalled an evening when Ronan had mentioned a mistake he'd made involving Ciara. The colleague remembered the tension in his voice, the way he suddenly grew distant. Ronan had never talked about her that way before, the woman told investigators. He said she was ungrateful, that she'd made a fool of him. Ronan Kearney had never truly let Ciara go. He had stalked her from Galway to Dublin, watching her every move. When he saw her trying to rebuild her life, he realized he couldn't control her anymore. And that anger, the kind that twisted deep inside him, had driven him to kill her. But Owen Murphy? He was just an opportunistic witness. A man who had seen Ronan tailing Ciara and decided to follow in his wake, hoping to get close to her in some way. He was nothing more than a pawn in Ronan's game of control, someone who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The shocking truth had come to light. But it wasn't just the murder that shocked Detective O'Malley. It was the twisted sense of entitlement and obsession that had driven Ronan Kearney to take a life. And for Ciara Donnelly, it had cost her everything. The investigation into Ciara Donnelly's murder had taken an unexpected turn. Just as the police thought they had the case wrapped up with Ronan Kearney, a disturbing new lead surfaced. A phone call, recorded in the weeks before Ciara's death, would unravel everything the detectives thought they knew. Ciara's former coworker, Sophie, had been sitting quietly in a Dublin coffee shop when her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Thinking it was a mistake, she almost didn't answer. But something told her to pick up. "Hello." The voice on the other end was anxious, almost trembling. "Ciara?" Sophie asked, surprised. Sophie, I need to tell you something," came Ciara's voice, shaky, hurried. I think he's been following me, and he found out where I moved. He won't leave me alone. He's been coming around. He's talking about a loan I still owe him." Her voice faltered. "He said I'm never going to be able to escape him." Sophie pressed her phone to her ear, listening, horrified as Ciara's words tumbled out. "Ronan gave me money once, to help with my rent, but I didn't know what it would cost me. He made me promises that he'd always take care of me. But he started to talk about how I owe him more than I can ever repay." "How much money are we talking about?" Sophie asked cautiously, her heart racing. "Thousands," Ciara whispered. "It's not just a loan. It's an agreement. A sick, twisted thing that I thought I could get out of. But now he's demanding more. He's never going to stop until I give him what he wants." Before Sophie could ask more questions, the line went dead. The call had been abruptly cut off. It wasn't until Sophie relayed this information to Detective O'Malley that the full extent of Ronan's control over Ciara came into focus. Ronan had made Ciara feel trapped, cornered, using her financial desperation against her. The loan, which had originally seemed like a simple act of generosity, was now clear as a manipulation, a means to bind her to him. And it was that very debt that fueled Ronan's obsessive need for control. But there was more. In the days following their conversation, Sophie mentioned something else. Ciara had mentioned a trip, she told O'Malley. She wanted to get away. I think she planned to leave Dublin, go somewhere far, far away, maybe even abroad. That was when everything clicked into place. Ronan hadn't just killed her in a moment of rage. He had seen her leaving as an escape, the ultimate betrayal. Her freedom meant that he had lost the last shred of power he thought he had over her. That had been his breaking point. The police discovered that in the days after the murder, Ronan had attempted to erase every trace of his involvement. His alibi was shaky at best. He claimed he had been at home that morning, but cell tower records proved otherwise. Worse still, he had wiped his phone clean, deleting every trace of communication between him and Ciara. But one mistake still hung over him. A bank receipt found in his car showed a large withdrawal just hours before the murder. The timing was too suspicious to ignore. Ronan had withdrawn exactly the amount of money he had given Ciara months earlier. The motive was there. He was trying to reclaim what he believed was his. But now the picture was complete. He had planned everything. On the morning of September 2nd, 2024, Ronan Kearney was arrested at his apartment. He didn't resist, but the expression on his face was emotionless, almost detached. It was as though he expected it all to happen. He was booked and charged with first-degree murder, but the public reaction was far from predictable. During the trial, Ronan maintained his innocence, even as the mountain of evidence against him stacked up. His defense lawyer, a seasoned expert at manipulating the courtroom, argued that Ronan's actions were the result of emotional instability, and he insisted that the death was an unfortunate accident that spiraled out of control. But the victim impact statements delivered by Ciara's family cut through the courtroom like a knife. Her mother, tearfully holding back her sobs, recounted the dreams she had for her daughter, a future that was stolen in a brutal, senseless act. She spoke of Ciara's ambition, her kindness, and how much she had wanted to escape from Ronan's clutches. And then, as the prosecutor painted a chilling picture of Ronan's calculated actions, something unexpected happened. Owen Murphy, the security guard who had followed Ciara on the morning of her death, took the stand. It was a dramatic moment. Owen's testimony was raw, filled with guilt. He confessed to following her, though he denied being involved in the murder. "I never meant for it to go this far," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I was scared, but I didn't know Ronan was capable of something like this." But the most shocking confession came just before the jury went to deliberation. Ronan Kearney himself stood up in the courtroom, his face pale, his voice shaking. "I couldn't let her go. She was mine," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She was supposed to stay with me, but she wanted to leave. I just couldn't let her slip away." The confession sent ripples of shock through the courtroom. Justice had been served, but the final twist was inescapable. Ronan Kearney's obsession, driven by a twisted sense of control, had led him down a dark path, and in the end, Ciara Donnelly had paid the ultimate price for daring to escape. Ronan Kearney was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Ciara Donnelly. And for those who loved her, the trial was bittersweet, a reminder of how one person's obsession can destroy lives, leaving nothing but a wake of pain and sorrow. Ciara Donnelly's death forces us to confront a reality that many of us choose to ignore: the invisible bonds of control and manipulation that can shape a person's life, and ultimately, their fate. In this case, it wasn't just about money or a fleeting relationship. It was about the darker side of human nature, the need for control, the desperation to own someone else's future, and the devastating consequences when those lines are crossed. What drives someone to stalk, manipulate, and ultimately destroy another person's life? Ronan Kearney's actions weren't about love. They were about ownership, a twisted need to possess someone who had already made it clear she was trying to break free. He saw Ciara not as an individual with her own dreams, but as an object that belonged to him. And for those like him, the inability to control that object can lead to a deadly conclusion. We live in a society where control is often mistaken for affection, where boundaries are blurred, and where it becomes difficult to distinguish a genuine relationship from one fueled by toxic obsession. This case highlights a fundamental truth. It's not always the physical violence that leaves the deepest scars, but the psychological manipulation that happens behind closed doors. How many more stories like Ciara's go unnoticed? How many people, both victims and perpetrators, hide behind a mask of normalcy? And perhaps the most chilling question of all: what if someone like Ronan is still out there, watching, waiting for their next victim to come into view? Ciara's life was cut short, but her story can serve as a powerful reminder of the dangers of toxic control in relationships, whether it's physical, emotional, or financial. It's a stark warning to always be vigilant, to listen to our instincts, and to never underestimate the destructive power of obsession. So, what do you think really happened? Was Ronan always this dangerous, or did his obsession grow over time? Could someone have seen the signs earlier? Comment below and share your thoughts. If you found this story chilling and thought-provoking, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into true crime cases like this one. We have more shocking stories to explore, and you won't want to miss them. Watch this next video for another unbelievable case, and remember, the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction.